Welcome back. You know, I was really looking forward to taking you out shooting today. I had a bunch of 45 ACPs made up. I was going to go shooting my 1911 and having all kinds of fun. But that's not going to happen today because it's pouring out. And it looks like the weather's socked in for the foreseeable future, for the next 2 or 3 days at least. So what I really want to do today is answer a question which has sometimes been asked about reduced loads. I've gotten a number of queries from people about whether they can reduce the charges that are listed in the manual below the lowest ones listed. My recommendation is not to do that. While it may be safe with certain powders, it's not a safe way to proceed, because those have not been categorically tested by the laboratory that produced the publication. And whenever you're dealing with charges that have not been tested, there is always the possibility that you could be running into unknown territory and you could destroy your gun or hurt yourself or somebody else at the range. And when I say that, certain powders, there's no specific classification or any readily obtainable information on the phenomenon known as detonation or explosive conduct inside of a chamber, but it does occur. It's a fact that it has occurred on frequent occasions, and oftentimes with charges which were used over and over and over again, sometimes by shooters who had used those same charges most of their life. It can be a very, very dangerous thing. It's most often associated with slow burning powders which are in the slowest burning categories of rifle powders, such as the powders which are used in magnum rifles and small bore high velocity rifles. 4831, 4350, powders like that, and your other magnum powders, they have been known to be associated with detonation if they're not completely loaded to full capacity. Now, while that's true, and while they are the powders that are most often associated with it, it has been pretty well documented that there have been cases where reduced loads besides those have been responsible for detonation, and involving more traditional, medium burning and even quicker burning powders, when they are used at rates which are grossly below, say, 50% of maximum. So that's why most of your powders that are listed in your manuals will show probably somewhere on the order of 80% density or more. Not only for safety factors, but it's also to provide best powder positioning within the case, so that you have consistent ignition, because the distance that the powder is from the primer can have some significant effect on its accuracy and the initial burning of the powder. When you reduce a charge below 80%, there's a possibility that the ignition won't be consistent from one shot to the next if the powder is not positioned exactly the same. Now, for a great number of years, it was recommended for people who wanted to reduce charges below the listed maximums to use, the faster burning powders within a given, within a given cartridge, and not to use anything less than the quickest burning powders. In other words, the ones that had that showed the smallest load density in a given cartridge and the lowest velocity. So those were the powders that they recommended in conjunction with filler material. Now, filler material was traditionally, for many years, Kapok and Dacron. Those were the two biggies. Kapok and Dacron. Kapok was that's a buoyant flotation material, which was used in Navy and civilian personal flotation devices, and you know, boat bumpers and things like that. Dog dummies, you know, that are thrown out into the water. Canvas covered dog retrieving dummies were made of kapok in most cases. It's a material that was basically stuffed down on top of a charge of powder, a reduced charge of powder, to keep its position within the case, to maintain that uniformity of ignition that I spoke of. And it also added density in the case to prevent it from rattling around and you know, causing other issues. But it was also there to ostensibly to protect the shooter from having issues with differences in powder charge. In other words, if you had a bunch of cases all loaded up, you had your filler material pre-measured, and you would stuff it inside each case, and if one of those cases wouldn't get stuffed, you knew that it was an overcharge. You knew that you had too much powder in the case. So it would also preclude the overcharging of a case by the fact that you were trying to put a filler in. But there are other ways to get around that. In recent years, it has, you know, reliable sources, laboratories and things like that have determined that the practice of using filler material, and one of the more common filler materials became cream of wheat. That was just the cereal. You know, that was one of the things that was commonly used for filler materials, as well as Dacron and kapok. It's very inexpensive. But you know, any of these fillers sometimes would become intermingled. Sometimes the powders would shift their position within the case, which wasn't necessarily such a problem with things like kapok and Dacron, but it could happen if it wasn't completely filled properly. But the thing that many of these studies have recently found in the last number of years, and I'm not sure exactly when this started surfacing, but I can tell you it's been in recent years. It's believed that the phenomenon of detonation or unexpected explosive discharges have been associated with using filler material. And so you'll see a lot less written about using filler material and reduced charges with standard powders. Things that used to be written up commonly, you know, like the late great Dean Grinnell and people like that used to popularize the use of and they were fabulous. They were fabulous authors that knew what they were doing with this stuff. And but you know, this we learn as we go along, and one of the things they're learning is that there's some questions about the reliability of such charges, and that's always something that piques my thought. Whenever there's a question, I just as soon steer clear if there's another way to get around things. You know, there's no reason to take chances if there's no reason to take chances. If there's another way to do something which is entirely safe, that's the way to proceed. What I recommend, and this is probably, I consider this the authoritative source for reduced loads, is this Lyman cast handbook, cast bullet handbook. This has got every cartridge in it, handgun and rifle cartridge in it. Whether you're loading up a 30-30, whether you're loading up a 300 Winchester Magnum, or even this has even got a 338 Lapua in it. It's got them all. Plus, it's got all your handgun loads for standard cast bullets. And you know, you'd be surprised. A lot of people are not familiar with the fact that that you can get cast bullets for your rifle. For instance, here's a 308 Winchester page. It lists, now this is certainly not all the different cast bullet shapes and weights that are available for the 308 Winchester. There are, in fact, there's another page over here. This is certainly not the end all of the various bullet weights and styles that are made, because this only lists, for instance, there's a few Lyman. Naturally, this is a Lyman book, so Lyman is a manufacturer of very high grade cast iron bullet molds. So it lists all the Lyman bullets, but also in here under 308 it lists a Lee bullet for 150 grain. It lists well, apparently they're all in 308. They're all the ones that they list are all Lyman, but there's also Seiko and RCBS listed under other under cartridges other than that caliber. Let me see, 3240, for instance, RCBS and Seiko, which is Redding. So you have different manufacturers with different bullet styles and weights that are listed in this book. And the reduction in charges is quite significant. For instance, if you're interested in loading up the 7mm 08, you know that standard velocities with 140 grain bullet run upwards of 2,800 feet per second, and if you reduce the charges, you might be able to get down legitimately to 2,400 feet per second or something like that with standard powders. But if you're loading 135 grain Lyman bullet, you can very easily find loads that will reduce the velocity down to 1,495 feet per second with a Lyman number 287346 bullet. That's the catalog number for that bullet. So you can be down to 1,400 and something feet per second with that particular bullet, or you can drive faster bullets, heavier bullets rather, 160 grain bullets. You can drive those down to 1,400 feet per second as fast as 2,300 feet per second. So this really gives you a huge selection of reduced loads that are a lot of fun. So if I want to go out and take my 32 Winchester Special, and rather than shooting standard factory loads, which are 170 grain or 165 grain bullets, socking out at 2,300 feet per second, I'll tell you, wearing a shirt like this on a summer day with this steel butt plate, it gets a little bit old in a hurry. So that sort of load is not what I would say is a fun plinking load. You'd have to put some sort of a padded material on here, or put a padding on your shirt or something. But that's not really something that's a lot of fun to plink with. But on the other hand, I can load up some nice 32 special cartridges with reduced loads using the powders which are recommended, and get the velocities way down. I can get the velocities down significantly and fill in any load category that I want. Well, let's just see, for instance, what that would do. Say you had a 30-30. I'll say that we're dealing with a 30-30. Now you don't have to shoot 170 grain bullets. You can shoot 150 grain bullets, and there are others out there that are even lighter than that. But I can reduce the charges with 150 grain bullets using Trail Boss powder down to 1,139 feet per second. That's really a cool load for plinking, and it's barely over the speed of sound. You might even be subsonic in some cases, but that's the sort of thing that's a lot of fun. Whether you're just punching holes in tin cans, rolling them around, and sometimes when you have a load that's a little bit reduced like that with a big bullet, the can actually moves rather than just sitting there with holes going through it, because that's what usually happens when you have high velocity bullets. Is you don't even move the can; they just simply stay there. But by the same token, I can work up loads that will get up to standard velocities and beyond. I can go up to 2355 with a Lyman cast bullet. So there's a great wealth of information in here, and this is a resource that everybody who's interested in hand loading should have. This is the Lyman Cast Bullet Handbook. Now, is it usable only for cast bullets? Say you're just interested in buying your jacketed bullets in a box the way you've always been buying your bullets for your standard loads. Certainly you can use, you can use standard bullets, jacketed ammo in that data without any difficulties whatsoever. Simply work up your loads. Don't just expect that you can use the highest maximum charges without working your charges up as you would normally do. It's just the same thing. You just normally, as you would customarily do, you work your charges up. By how much and what amount of increment? Well, you just simply reduce the increment to the level of the charge that you're using. In other words, it's scaled down. So if you're using, for instance, whereas a 308, for instance, may have a standard charge weight of around 40 grains of powder, where you're using increments of 4/10 of a grain to work up your charges. These loads may be down as low as 15 or 20 grains of powder. So you'd be working up your increments in, say, 2/10 of a grain at a time. So in other words, just moving your decimal point over from a rounded off average of your case capacity. So that's what you do. You just simply follow along the recipe for cast bullet loads, but use your own jacketed bullets, and you'd be fine. And you have some extraordinarily fun shooting. They're useful for so many things. If you want to have a great small game load for your 30-06 that won't blow your small game to smithereens, at 3,000 feet per second, you can get a cast bullet load that will fly out of your gun at less than 2,000 feet per second, maybe even down to 1,400, 1,500 feet per second, that will really chug along. Now remember, that's not over slow. That's a heavy bullet. Anything like 150 grain bullet that's traveling at supersonic speeds is still in excess of the speeds that you'll encounter with most of your rimfire cartridges, and certainly is going to be a lot of power. On a relative scale, it's not a lot of power compared to its full-size counterpart. Its factory counterpart. But you can reduce the loads. You can also reduce the loads for very, very practical purposes. If you got somebody in the house who's a small-framed individual that just can't stand to, shoot your 308 or even your 30-30, tailor it down, load things down, have some good practice sections with some very, very reduced mild loads. Now you're going to have to jack your sights up, because the bullet's going to come out and it's going to be heading to the earth quicker than it does when it's shooting out at its standard velocity. So you have to take that into consideration. You might be standing 50 yards away from a target expecting to see holes in the paper, when in reality they're going underneath the paper. That it can be that significant. So with a gun like this, it's kind of handy, because you just simply take the ladder and throw it up a couple of notches or more, and you'll have yourself the sight in that you need. So you can adapt your gun to those circumstances. If you're shooting a 22-250 and you're shooting reduced loads at 1,900, 2,000 feet per second or something like that, it's just simply a matter of just changing the scale on your turret and bringing the crosshairs accordingly. So those are all super reasons to consider reduced loads. You're in a different world of powders now. So let me explain a little bit about some of things that you need to do to be very, very cautious. The powders that you're going to be using for these reduced loads that don't require fillers, remember that, as I say, filler material has been blamed. They can't, in a laboratory, they can't replicate this stuff. For some strange reason, it evades replication in laboratory conditions. They try it so often, and they just can't seem to get a gun to detonate on demand. But they know it happens, so they know that it occurs with unexpected results, that it just suddenly happens. So what they do know is that certain powders don't need to have a bulky case. They don't need to be filled up in order to burn correctly without regard to powder positioning. It was oftentimes seen at ranges where, you know, back in the day when people would shoot, not all people who shot reduced standard powders would use fillers. Even then, there were people who just simply didn't want to bother, either didn't want to bother, or they were skeptical about using filler material. So you'd see them at the target line at ranges which would allow it. They would chamber around, and then they would bounce it on their arm and then slowly lower it down to maintain that position from one shot to another. So you used to see that quite frequently, and it's still done. It's still done on occasion now. But the powders which are typically used now for instance, listed in this book right here, they really don't need to have that any more than you have to worry about the positioning of you know, red dot powder or something like that in your 44 Special. They just simply burn so efficiently that the powder flash inside the case reaches it, and they always burn with the same consistency. So the filler material is unnecessary. However, this brings up a very, very serious situation, and that's the possibility of overcharging. Some of these powders can very easily be double charged without detection. In my 44 Special load video, I showed you how to take a flashlight and to use the flashlight down the cases to illuminate any cases that were double charged. And you could easily see them with that big gaping hole, and the same with 38 Specials and 357 Magnums. It's very easy to spot anything that's overfilled because the flashlight easily points it out. But when you've got a case which is a bottleneck case, for instance, if you're loading reduced charges to your 223, it's not easy to see down inside that case. You really can't see down inside that case even with a flashlight and reliably see with your naked eye whether that case has been appropriately filled. But what you can do, and what's absolutely imperative, is that you use some sort of a gauge. And I'm speaking here of when we're loading from a block. If we're loading from a progressive machine that dispenses the powder automatically as it goes around its whirligig, then it takes care of the safety issue all by itself because it can't be double charged. Most progressive machines simply can't double charge because they can't go through the same cycle twice. But I have here, I just simply made just a Rube Goldberg gauge. This is nothing but a door hinge, and I simply put a piece of tape at the standard. I take a case which is filled to the depth that's necessary for a properly charged case. Then I go one after another, and I verify each one, and there we go. You see, I did this for demonstration purposes too. This is not something that I did by accident. This is something I did and set up purposely in advance. So there we go. That's a case which has been grossly overfilled, and that one I can immediately set aside and cull out. So that one there, I know that I had, for whatever reason, my concentration had been disturbed, and I can continue to go on down through. And there's another problem. a case that hasn't been filled at all, which can be every bit as similarly dangerous, because I could fire that in a hasty shooting situation. I could fire that, put a bullet in my bore, obstruct the bore, and the next round will take the gun apart. So that's just an illustration of how to gauge your cases. That's the only way to reliably tell that you have all your cases properly filled. And I can't overemphasize the need for gauging your cases when you have such powders as that. All you need to have is a device like that, or you can just take a piece of dowel and put a line on it at your standard load and go through all your cases. And it's very, very simple. It's worth the trip. It's worth the effort that you take to go around the cases, no matter how many it is, just to make sure that you not double charge. Because if you double charge one of these things, your pressures will go right through the roof, and there goes your nice Model 94 or your Model 700 or whatever it is. It's going to take it apart, guaranteed. And it probably will hurt you too, because when these things blow, they blow with vigor. There are a host of things that a person really needs. It's a whole nother world when it comes to cast bullets and reduced loads. I can't tell you again. I recommend getting this book, because the preface to the book, the beginning chapters, tell you all about. It tells you more than you really need to know in some cases. It tells you all about metallurgy, and tells you about things. It gives you stuff that, I mean, it's above my head, way above my head. Atomic percentage of antimony and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't relate to me. But there's other things in here that will tell you about, for instance, how to address certain types of firearms with cast bullets, especially. There are certain things that are not necessarily going to work out. If you've got a rifle, for instance, with Marlin micro groove rifling with the micro groove, the very fine rifling, don't spin well with cast bullets, and even with reduced loads. That rifling just does not grab the cast lead bullet properly. That's why certain rifles that Marlin makes advertise Ballard rifling, because they know that they're likely to be used by people who do bullet casting. So be mindful of that. I'm not saying not to try it if you want to give it a try, but I'd say rather than going out and buying a mold for it, first of all, just order up a few bullets from a bullet manufacturer who makes cast bullets and lubricates them, and try them. If they work in your gun, if you can find a load, a speed that works, that's fine, because there are sometimes micro groove barrels that will accept cast bullets if they're not sped up too fast. But those are the important issues, to make sure that you don't try to reduce loads that are below the stated minimums listed in a loading manual. That's a no-no. And if you don't know what I mean, I'm just turning, for instance, here's, if I can find a cartridge that everybody would find familiar. So here's the 308 Winchester. If I were loading 150 grain bullets and I were using a standard powder of IMR 4895, the lowest charge listed is 37.7 grains. Now, There are quite a number of people out there who would say that 4895 is one of those powders that is it's in a medium burning range, and I'll get people writing to me that say that they use reduced charges of 4895 and they've been using them for the last 53 years or something without any issue, and I'm not going to argue with it. That's fine. But what has come to light in recent years is that there have been some questions about such practices, that those powders can have problems, especially if they're used in conjunction with fillers that can, for whatever reason, the filler has been associated with some problems too. So whether it's powder positioning, whether it's the burning rate, whether it's the fillers, whatever it is, these are not the powders that are recommended necessarily unless they're recommended by this book here, which deals with, by its very nature, it's not a reduced load handbook, and yet it is because of its nature. Because these loads are intended for cast bullets are by their very nature a slow projectile compared to jacketed bullets, because they have to be kept, generally speaking, they have to be kept somewhere below about 2,300 feet per second or less. So that's the correct source for reducing loads. And once you start looking at the powders, you may very well find some reduced loads that use powders such as 4895 and things like that. If you get it in that book, you can take it to the bank. But if you get it in this book and if you try to monkey with loads by bringing them down below the listed minimums, you can get into some serious trouble. So it's never recommended. Most of these manuals will clearly state someplace, do not reduce loads below the minimums listed. It's just it's fraught with danger, so don't go there. And as I said at the very beginning, there's no reason to go there because there are powders which are well suited to it. Some of the powders which have been commonly used for reduced loads are some of the most popular pistol powders that you may already have on hand, such as Unique, Red Dot, Green Dot, SR20, what's the other ones? You've got IMR 4227, there's some of the SR powders. There's all kinds of powders that are in that category that are, typically pistol powders. Another very popular powder right now is Trail Boss, because Trail Boss does two things. It not only gives you a reduced load, but it has great bulk, and it fills the case up a lot more than some of the other powders. Its only drawback is that because it's so bulky, when you don't buy a pound of it, you buy less, for the money that you spend, you don't get quite a pound. You get less than a pound. I can't tell you exactly what it is, but you don't get a full pound in a jug because it won't fit in the jug. So that's it. I hope to get out shooting as soon as I possibly can. But while I was taking a day indoors, I thought I'd introduce you to something that can save you a little bit of money. It's not much. It's saving you money on, mostly it's saving you money on powder. If you can load your own, lead, if you can cast your own bullets, all the better, and then you save a lot of money. But that's the name of the game. You can have a lot of fun. Reduce the recoil on your shoulder. Take your kids out shooting something that they normally wouldn't be able to shoot. Shoot a game that you wouldn't normally be able to shoot without destroying it. So it opens up a whole nother world with all the guns that you already have. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to tell your friends and subscribe. God bless.